So welcome to our programming of the Advent of Code 2020. This is Dad and Thomas, and
Hello.
and we're going to pair program this in Pharo Smalltalk. So this is a repository that I've created that you are welcome to clone. It basically loads in some starting code and gets everything set up to let you do the Advent of Code in Smalltalk. So I'm first of all going to open up the Advent of Code, and the Advent of Code looks like this, and it basically is a series of programming problems, and unfortunately I kind of got ahead of myself and I did them this afternoon because I was showing my class, but Thomas and I are going to work through it anyway. So the fact that I've already done this question is okay. We're going to work through it. So we're not going to read through all of this. You could pause the video and read through it if you want. But
Well,
basically oh, no, you can't. Sorry, you lose. The idea is that we have to collect 50 stars by December 25th. And so we can earn 2 stars a day, because there are 2 puzzles every day. And some of them you could solve by hand, but realistically, for most of them, you need to have a computer. So you need to program in some language. And we've chosen to do it in Smalltalk. So this is the description of the first part of the puzzle. So I'm just going to go back to the Advent of Code, and we're doing this in Pharo Smalltalk. So I'm going to actually show you everything that you would have to do to duplicate what we're doing here. So I'm going to open this. I should have actually clicked it differently, but that's okay. So we're going to download the Pharo launcher, and we're running on Mac OS, so we'll download the one for Mac OS. And it's going to get loaded down, and we have a fairly fast internet connection, so it will be here fairly soon. There we go, and we're just verifying it, and now we're going to install this quickly. So I'm just going to drag this over here. I already have this here, so it's going to tell me, do I want to replace it? And I'll say yes, let's replace it. Okay, so that's that, and we'll get rid of that, and we'll go back over to Firefox. So so here's the Advent of Code. So I'm going to actually run that application, which allows me to launch a Pharo image. And it's the first time I'm running it, so it's verifying it. Yes, I trust the Pharo people. So it's starting out for the first time, so it's going to take a couple of moments because it needs to download some things off the internet. So once it's loaded, we'll create a Smalltalk image that we'll program in, and then we'll load this repository that I've set up here. And it is not loading. Why is it not loading?
Runner resists making jokes about programming.
Okay, you do that. So I actually, I'm going to create a new repository. So I'm actually going to delete the one that I had there. I'm going to delete this one just so that we do this completely from scratch. So delete this, yes. And now I'm going to create a new repository, and I'm going to take the Pharo 9 64-bit image because that's the latest one, and I'm going to call this Advent of Code 2020 and create the image. So it's busy transferring the image off the internet and setting it up, and now it's ready to go. So it selected this one, so we'll launch this, and off we go. So this is the Pharo image, and I'm going to full screen this so that we can see it as well as possible. This is a a cool little tutorial that will get you started in Pharo. I'm going to skip it because I've been programming Pharo for quite a while. And I'm just going to do one thing, which is to change the settings and increase the font size a little bit. Let's make them large. Okay, so now I want to, Pharo has many tools that we could use, but the one we want to start with is the playground. And we're going to blow this playground up. Actually, I'll make it fill this screen. And I'm just going to do a couple quick things. That it's just the way I like to program with this. I'm going to make it a window group and make it unclosable. Now, if we go back over to our, whoops, wrong window. If we go back over to here, we have this sequence of code here, which is going to load in this repository, the one we're actually looking at right here. So I'm going to copy that and paste it in here. Paste it in here. And select all that and tell it to execute that. So it's downloading that repository right now, and there's just a little bit of startup code in it. There's nothing very significant. Like I don't have any real code there at this point. So I'm going to add a system browser to this, and I'm going to tell it that I want to look at the advent of code, and there we get there we see that of code. Anyway, there it is. So we'll add that, and we'll just put that up in our tab here. So there we go. So the advent of code. So there is nothing in here. This is a class, but there are no methods there. And even if we look at the class side, no methods there. So there's nothing here that we're just starting with. And I'm going to create another browser, and I'm going to use that to open the tests. And so we'll go to the tests. And again, there's no code here, class side or instance side. So, but we're ready to go to create new tests. So this is a test case, and I like to do something called test-driven design, which means that I write the test before I write the code. So let's go and look at the problem, and let's just skip over to here. So this is quite humorous. It's well written, and the first problem. Basically, as I said, we need to collect 50 stars, and which are kind of coins, and we get 1 star for each puzzle. So here's our first puzzle. So before you leave, the elves in accounting just need you to fix your expense report. Apparently something isn't quite adding up. So specifically, they need you to find the 2 entries that sum to 2020, and then multiply those 2 numbers together. For example, suppose your expense report contained the following, and that is my input. In this list, the 2 entries that sum to 2020 are 1721 and 299. And if you multiply them together, we get this number. So the correct answer is this. So let's go over and put this test case into our code. So I'm going to create a new instance side. This is in the tests. So I'm going to add a new instance side method, and I'm going to call it test Day01A, because there's 25 days and I want them to stay in order. So so there's 2 parts in each day. So there's part A and part B. So the way I write this test is I say self assert, and I want to assert that something, and in this case it's this. Whoops, not what I wanted. Undo that. Let's go back over here. I didn't obviously copy this. So let's go back over here. So I want to assert that this, if I send it the message Day01 equals and it tells me that should equal this. Okay, so I'm going to say that that equals this value. And that's my first test. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. Put some, just clean the spacing up a little bit. Just to make it a little bit more readable. There, okay, so I'm going to assert that if I send the day1 message to this vector, this list, array of 6 numbers, that that function is going to equal this answer. Okay, so I'm going to save this test, and it wants to. So let's call this Dad and Thomas. I'm typing right now, but Thomas is going to type a bit later when he feels more comfortable with that. Okay, so this is ready to run. So even though we haven't defined this method yet, we'll get to it. So what happens is that now we can click this little button here and it will run the test. So it runs the test, and when it runs, it says that the instance of array, that's what this was, did not understand the message Day01. Well, that's not surprising because I just made that up for this problem. So what I'm going to do is I want to create a message that's going to process this array and produce this answer. So I'm going to tell it that I want to create that message, okay, or a method to answer that message. And where do I want to do it? I could put it in any of these 3 would be good places for it, but I'm actually going to put it in array, in the closest one. And so this is here. I'm just going to do one small little detail first. I'm going to browse it, and I'm going to tell it that I want it to be an extension in the AdventOfCode 2020. So what I'm doing is I'm saying associate this code, even though I'm putting it into the system array class, I want it to be associated with my code, with the AdventOfCode 20 package. So that's all I needed to do there. So now I am ready to implement this method. And here's what I've got. I've got these numbers, and what I want to do is I want to go through all of these numbers, and I want to find the numbers that are that the 2 of them together add up. So, any ideas on how to do that?
Absolute silence.
Absolute silence from the sun. So what we want to do is we probably want to look at the first number and see if any of the other numbers added to it add up to 2020. And then if that doesn't, then we'll try the next number and all the rest of the numbers.
Right.
And then the next number and the next, all the numbers.
Now, immediately looking at that, now that I've actually know the conclusion, because, paying attention isn't my strong suit, I can immediately tell personally that 299 should be paired up with 1721 to create 2020.
Right. So let's do this. So what do we want to do is we want the current array, and we want to go through and we want to with index do. With index do is the one here. So I want to iterate through the values, but then I want to know what position I am in the list, in the array, so that I can not retest those points. So I'm going to create something called a block here, and a block is just a chunk of code that I want to execute. So I'm going to have the current value, which I'm going to call the first value, and I'm going to have the index. And or let's call it index. Oops. Only one I will probably do. The computer doesn't care, but it's a little bit prettier to write it this way. So now I don't have to write this particularly defensively because I know there is a solution to it. So I'm going to basically assume that it all works out. So I'm So now I've got the first value and I have to add up the two values. So I've got the first one, and I know how many or what position I am in the list. So if I took, what I want to do is I want to compare this value with all the rest of the values in the array. So that's the self, the array, with that many ignored. So I'm going to call that self all but first, and I want to skip the first index values. So if I'm currently in position 2, let's say, then I want to skip those first two values and compare this number with the rest of them. So this says, give me self all but first. And I can actually execute this. One of the nice things about Smalltalk is I can actually execute this code right now, except I don't have index. Okay, so let's just cancel that for a moment. But I could do all but first 3, for example, to see if that does the right thing. Oops. So self, as we can see, is the array of 6 elements. So self all but 3 will be, if I ask for that, that's the numbers 299, 265. So it's the last 3. It skips the first 3 of them. Okay, so that seems to be more or less right. So what I wanted to do now is I want to loop through all of those. So I'm going to say do again, but I don't need an index this time. So I'm just going to say do, and again I'm going to have a value from this position. I'm going to call this the second value because I'm going to add the second value to this. And now the code is actually pretty simple. All I need to say is does first plus second equal 2020? I'm just going to put some spaces and make it a little bit more readable. Does first plus second equal 2020? Well, if it does, then I've found my solution, right? So I'm going to say if true, then return, and what does the code say that I'm supposed to do? I'm supposed to, if I find two entries that sum to 2020, then I want to multiply them together and return that as the result. So I'm going to say return first times second. Okay, so I might have it right, I might have it wrong. Let's save that. So now that code has been compiled and is ready to run. But notice that I'm still in the middle of debugging this. Like it's still in the middle of running test Day01A. But that's okay. So now I'm just going to tell it to proceed, see if I got it right. And see that nice little green box and the green dot here? It says, yep, you actually got it right. So that was pretty easy. So now we're kind of ready to do the next part. Because that was just so that we could verify that our code was right. And it is, and one test is not enough usually to get everything right, but in this case, at least hopefully we'll get it right. It's a pretty simple problem. So now they provide, normally when I first ran this, it didn't show the part 2 part at all. It just asked or offered me to get my puzzle input. And so here's my puzzle input. And this is a lot of stuff. And it's the data for today's puzzle. So I'm just going to copy this. And this is unique. If you were running this, you would have a different set of input. But this is my input. So I copied that. Let's go back to Pharo. And I'm going to create a new method here that is going to be data for Day01. Okay, so this is just going to be a method that's going to return this great long array. And I scroll down to the bottom of it and add a close parenthesis. And there we go. So, so I have this method that is going to return the data for day 1. Okay, so now we're ready to test that. So let's say self assert, and what do I want? Well, I want self data for day 1, and then I want to apply the Day01 method to that data, and that should equals, well, I don't know yet. Well, actually I do because I ran it before, but when I wrote it the first time I didn't know what it was, so I just said equals nil. So now what happens, I'll save that, and I can rerun my test. And when I rerun my test this time, I get an error, or failure actually. It says I got this number, 956091, instead of nil. In other words, this part returned 956091. So I'm trusting that that is actually the right value, 956091. So now I'll rerun my test and it works, but did I get the right answer? So this is the answer that my code says, and now let's just step back here and see what the your puzzle answer was this, and I got it correct. So when the first time you run this, there's a little submit box, and you paste in the value that you got, and then you click the submit, and off it goes. So part 1 done, 1 star. Okay, so now we're on to part 2. So as soon as you've done that, it presents you with part 2. So the elves in County are thankful for your help. One of them even offers you a starfish coin they had left from a past vacation. Okay, so now we have one of our coins. They offer you a second one if you can find 3 numbers in your expense report that meet the same criteria. So using the example, this one here, the 3 entries that sum to 2020 are 979, 366, and 675. Multiplying them together produces this answer. So this would be the answer that we would expect here. So let's just copy that and take that over to our code. Because now we're going to rewrite this method. It's very similar, but we'll basically change this to B. And we're now going to write the Day01 B message. I guess we should rename the Day01 message. Actually, I'll do that first. So I'll look for all definitions of Day01. Here's the only one there is. I'm going to browse it, and I'm going to rename it. So I'll rename it to Day01A. Rename it and apply, and we're done. Okay, so now Day01B should equal this number. Okay, and we're going to call Day01B here, and we don't know what it's going to return, so we'll say nil. That's okay. We went off and did something else. I'm just going to update this one because, oh, it actually corrected this. So when I renamed Day01 to Day01A, it already updated this. So I can rerun this test, and that test still runs and produces a green result.
Man, what a fantastic piece of software. It would be such a shame if people were not to use it. Wink, wink.
It would. So now when we run Day01B, that one fails because, sorry, let's just open it back. So that fails because we haven't defined this yet. So when we run it, we get a red dot instead of a green dot. And again, it says the instance of array did not understand Day01B. So again, we'll create the method. And again, we'll put it in array. So now we have our method. And this is actually going to be very much like Day01A. So I'm going to go and get the code for that first. So I'm actually going to close this and go back to here, and we have this method Day01A. So I'm going to rewrite this method to be the other one. So this one is Day01B. And now, what's different here? Well, for Day01A, we had to find two values that added up and did this. Now we have to do a third value. So what we want to do is actually do sort of a combination of the two pieces from before. So I'm going to copy this code and see if I can get it right here. So that's not quite right. So let's. Okay, so we want to work through the whole of this array with the first in the index. Let's call this index 1 now because we have two indices. Sorry, this is still index 1. So we're going to ignore all but the first index values. And now we want to actually do this. So we're going to loop through this, and this is now the second value, and index 2. And then we want a third loop that's going to go through all but the first values from index 1 plus index 2. Because index 1 is how far we skipped for the first one, index 2 is how far we've skipped for the second one, and here we want third. So now we have that first plus second plus third equals 2020. If that's true, then we want to return first times second times third. Okay, and we just need an extra closing bracket because we've got 3 loops now instead of just 2. And let's just save that. So let's see if we think it's doing the right thing. So we're going to loop through the whole array, all of self, and with first being the first of the 3 values that we're going to check for adding and multiply. And keep track of how far along we are through the loop. Then we're going to skip that many values and loop through the rest with an index, and this is the index into that subgroup, and the second value to do. And then we want to skip the original array, but skipping all the values that the first loop was skipping, plus all the ones from the second loop, and we want to get a third value. And then we would add up the 3 values, see if they equal 2020, and if they are, then we return the product. Okay, so let's go back to our test and see how it works now. And it worked, it did something, and we got this big number here. So let's just copy this number and put that in here. And assume that it's the right answer. And then we go over to our test, and we would fill in the value and click submit. And in fact, there is the value that I determined earlier was the correct answer. And we're done. So both of our tests are working properly, and we've implemented 2 methods, a Day01A and a Day01B method. And we put them in array just because that was a very convenient place to put them. We could have done it in other ways. In other languages, we probably would. But in Smalltalk, this is a very natural way of doing it. Because the image, what we're working in, is the application. And so we can extend built-in classes like array or integer or object any way we want to build up the code that solves our problem. So it really doesn't matter where we put the code, whether we put it inside the AdventOfCode class or inside some system class like array. as long as the total application is correct and works consistently, that's perfectly fine. So our AdventOfCode class actually still does not have any code in it, but because we put the code into array as an extension based on the AdventOfCode 2020. So the last thing that we would do at this point is we would go and there's a tool called Iceberg which implements a version control system, and we would take our AdventOfCode 2020 and we would say that we are ready to commit the changes. So here's all the code that we just wrote. We wrote these two methods in array and they're part of this package. And we wrote these two test messages and the one that has the data for the day, and those are all attached to the test class. So completed day 1, 2 stars. And we're actually going to push the changes to the origin, and we're done. Pushing, and they are gone. And now if we go back over to GitHub, we will see that that 14 seconds ago we committed code to these two packages within this, and we're ready to go with day 3 tomorrow. So I hope you found that interesting, and I certainly encourage you to clone this if you want and go and download Pharo. You saw all the steps we had to do to actually get it started and to go through and execute it. So I hope you have fun, and I hope we'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Alright.